It was a surprisingly warm October evening. The Old Harbor restaurant, located in a historic building on the Boston waterfront, was glowing with lights. A string of expensive cars lined up at the entrance, from which guests in evening clothes steadily emerged. The 25th anniversary of Thornton construction promised to be one of the most significant events of the business season. Randall Thornton stood at the panoramic window of the main hall, absent-mindedly twirling a glass of whiskey. His tall, trim figure in an impeccably tailored tuxedo reflected in the glass against the evening harbor. In his 42 years, he looked exactly as a successful businessman should, confident and respectable, except that there was a kind of wariness lurking in his gray eyes. "Mr. Thornton, representatives of Boston Development have arrived," his assistant Marilyn Caldwell said softly as if out of thin air. Randall nodded and headed toward the entrance to greet the important partners. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed his companion Delilah, who was talking animatedly with the wife of the company's general counsel. Her bright red dress emphasized her slender figure but was perhaps a little too provocative for a corporate event. "Randy, honey," Delilah waved at him encouragingly, but Randall pretended not to notice. Something about her behavior today alarmed him even more than usual. She had shown up at the restaurant unusually early, demanded champagne at once, and was now moving from group to group, laughing too loudly and constantly tapping her glass. By 9 o'clock, all the invitees, about 80 people, had gathered in the hall. A jazz quartet played softly and waiters glided silently between tables with trays. Randall habitually made small talk, shook hands, smiled, but the inner tension wouldn't let go. He noticed Marilyn exchanging quick glances with James Brown, the head of security. Everything was ready to go. "Ladies and gentlemen," the clinking of a crystal glass drew the attention of those gathered. Randall stepped up to a small dais near the center wall. "Allow me to welcome you to this important evening for our company." He spoke of the company's accomplishments, thanking partners and employees. And then his voice grew quieter and more heartfelt. "But tonight, I want to say a few words about the man without whom none of this would be possible. About my father, Howard Thornton." Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Delilah straighten abruptly in her seat. Her fingers turned white, clutching the stem of her glass. "My father taught me the most important thing, honesty in business and in life. He said you can lose money, but you can't lose your reputation. You can make a mistake, but you can't betray—" "Hypocrite!" A piercing shriek made everyone flinch. Delilah jumped up from the table, staggering on her stilettos. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her mascara smudged slightly under her eyes. "You're as deceitful as all of them." In the silence that ensued, she could be heard rummaging through her purse. "Delilah, please," Randall began, but she had already pulled out a stack of papers and a lighter. "You thought you could just kick me out of your life? After everything?" Her voice trailed off into hysterical tones. "You know what this is? It's your precious inheritance, the company documents you've so carefully guarded." The guests watched in horror as the flames engulfed the papers. Delilah laughed triumphantly. "If it can't be mine, neither can you." Two guards were already rushing toward her, but she managed to toss the burning remains of the papers to the floor. "Don't touch me. I'll leave on my own." Randall calmly observed what was happening. His face expressed nothing but mild squeamishness. This clearly confused Delilah. She had expected a different reaction. "Take her out," he commanded the guard softly, "and call the police." "You're going to regret this, Randall," Delilah shouted as she was led toward the exit. "I swear you'll regret it." 10 minutes later, she was sitting in the back seat of the police car, still seething with anger. Through the window, she saw Randall approaching the car. A triumphant smile played on her lips. But the smile froze and turned into a grimace of horror when she saw him pull a neat, gold-embossed folder from the inside pocket of his jacket. Even from a distance, it was obvious that these were the originals of those very documents. "It's time we had a serious talk, Delilah," he said, getting into the car next to her. There was no longer a shadow of the softness in his voice that she had grown accustomed to over the past year. Beacon Hill had always remained a symbol of Boston's old money. Even in the 80s, when the city's new neighborhoods began to be built up with modern skyscrapers, the place still had a prim Victorian atmosphere. The Thornton Mansion, built back in the 19th century, stood out even against the background of other respectable houses with its immaculately manicured flower beds and perfectly trimmed boxwood bushes. Little Randall often sat on the wide windowsill of the third floor, watching the passers-by below. From here, he had a beautiful view of Boston Common, America's oldest city park. He felt safe here, away from his father's piercing gaze and his perpetual displeasure. "The Thorntons don't hide in corners," Howard Thornton repeated with enviable regularity. Tall, trim, with a military bearing and a steely look in his gray eyes, he seemed like a man carved from granite. His presence filled any room, making those around him feel uncomfortable. The only person who could alleviate this pressurizing atmosphere was Elizabeth Thornton, a thin woman with kind brown eyes and a soft smile. She had the ability to turn a prim mansion into a home with her mere presence. "Your father only wants what's best for you, sweetheart," she'd say, when Randall, offended by another reprimand, would come running to her in the greenhouse, her favorite place in the house. "He just doesn't always know how to show it properly." Elizabeth loved spending time among her orchids. She could spend hours telling her son about each flower, about how important it was to find the right approach to these capricious plants. "See, each one has its own character," she smiled, "just like people. You just have to learn to understand them." She was gone suddenly. The cancer had been discovered too late, and it had been swift, like a gust of wind blowing out a candle. Randall was 15 at the time, and it was the first time he had ever seen his father cry. That night, standing at his wife's bedside in the hospital, the iron Howard Thornton sobbed like a child, and his son awkwardly stroked his back, not knowing how to comfort him. After Elizabeth's death, the relationship between father and son became even more strained. Howard went to work, as if trying to dull the pain with endless meetings and contracts. He expected his son to do the same, to fully immerse himself in the family business. "The company is our legacy," he kept saying. "Someday it will all be yours. You have to be ready." But Randall dreamed of something else. After a brilliant high school graduation, he applied to Princeton to study art. A conversation with his father about it turned into a real battle. "Art!" Howard threw the file folder on the table in a rage. "You want to trade the real thing for some pictures? I didn't build this company so my son could become—" "Who, Dad?" Randall asked quietly. "Someone who isn't like you?" At Princeton, he met Evelyn. She was studying art history and seemed the complete opposite of everything he was used to at home. Bright, free-spirited, with a lock of red hair and a ringing laugh. They'd gotten married in their senior year, much to Howard's displeasure. "She's out of our league," was all his father said when he heard of the engagement. The marriage lasted 3 years. One day, returning home earlier than usual, Randall found his wife with an art history professor. The divorce was quick and painful, and with it, the dream of a career in art crashed. "I was right," was all Howard said when his son showed up at his office asking for a job with the company. But there was no triumph in his voice, only weariness. For the next few years, Randall plunged headlong into his work, as if trying to prove something, either to his father or to himself. Gradually, the ice between them began to melt. Howard was surprised to find that his son had inherited his business acumen, and Randall began to understand his father better. The second marriage happened almost by accident. Catherine was from the right environment, the daughter of a banker, impeccable manners, impeccable closet, impeccable connections in society. She was ideally suited to the role of the wife of a successful businessman, except that there was no love in this marriage from the start. Sometimes the right choice is not the happiest, Howard said philosophically when Randall announced his impending second divorce. The last months of his father's life had been difficult. Cancer, like his mother's, only this time they knew in advance. Howard was fading slowly, but held on to the last of it. "Listen to me carefully, son," he said one evening, calling Randall over to his hospital bed. "I've realized a lot of things over the years. Maybe it's too late. But remember, in this world you can't take people's word for it, especially those who talk too pretty about love and devotion." Those were some of his last words. A week later, Randall was alone, truly alone now, with a huge company on his hands and the burden of responsibility for hundreds of employees. In the evenings, he often sat in his father's office, looking at the family photographs on the walls. His father's stern profile, his mother's soft smile, his own childish face. They all seemed to be watching him, silently asking, "Can you do it?" The company flourished under his leadership. He inherited his father's business acumen and added his own vision to it. But at times, especially in the late evenings when he was alone in his huge office on the top floor of a skyscraper, a strange sense of emptiness enveloped him. Maybe that was why, when Delilah had come into his life, he'd allowed himself to believe in the possibility of true happiness. As it turned out, for nothing. The charity auction for the Children's Hospital was held at one of Boston's most prestigious hotels. Randall was not particularly fond of such events, but his status obliged him to attend. Besides, it was a good opportunity to support a really important cause. "Good evening, Mr. Thornton." A melodious voice made him turn around. Standing in front of him was a spectacular brunette in an elegant navy blue dress. "I'm Delilah Priestley, the coordinator of tonight's event. May I show you the lot catalog?" She moved with the grace of a dancer, spoke softly, and held herself with dignity. Nothing like the pushy socialites who usually tried to get his attention at events like this. "This lot here might be of particular interest to you." Delilah pointed to a photograph of an antique map of Boston. "As far as I know, you're fascinated by the city's history?" Randall raised an eyebrow in surprise. "You're well prepared." "It's my job to know my guests," she smiled, and charming wrinkles appeared in the corners of her eyes. "Though I must admit, I've learned more about you than my job required. Your company is a true legend in the construction business." Throughout the evening she appeared around as if by chance, either offering champagne or inquiring about his opinion of this or that lot. Her presence was not annoying, as was usually the case with annoying admirers. She had a sharp mind and some special, disposing sincerity. After the formal part, when most of the guests had departed, Randall found her in the hotel bar. She was sitting at the counter, thoughtfully stirring some kind of cocktail with a straw. "Rough night?" he asked, taking a seat beside her. "Oh, Mr. Thornton." She seemed to wake up from her reverie. "I'm sorry I didn't notice you. Yes, a little tired. You know, organizing events like this takes a tremendous amount of energy." "Call me Randall," he beckoned to the bartender. "Whiskey, please, and whatever this lady drinks is on me." "No need." She shook her head. "I was just about to leave." "Then let me order you a cab." "Actually, I don't live far away. I like to walk after such busy days." "In that case, may I keep you company? Boston at night can be dangerous for a single girl." She laughed. "Do I look like a helpless girl?" "No," he answered honestly. "Not at all." They walked around the night city for almost 2 hours. Delilah proved to be a great conversationalist. She knew the history of every old building they passed, quoted local poets, and told amusing urban legends. "How do you know all this?" Randall asked. "Oh, I love history, especially people's stories, how they lived, what they dreamed of, what they believed in." She paused by an ancient lantern. "You know, sometimes I think I was born in the wrong time. Everything is so pragmatic. In the light of the lantern, her face seemed especially beautiful and a little sad. Randall caught himself wanting to touch her cheek. Their first real date was a week later at dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the North End. Delilah came in a simple black dress, no jewelry, just pearl stud earrings. "A gift from my grandmother," she explained, noticing his gaze. "The only valuable thing I own, but I love them more than any diamonds." She talked about her childhood in a small town in Vermont, her work in various charitable organizations, and her love of art. It all sounded so natural, so sincere. Gradually, they began to see each other more and more often. Delilah never imposed, never demanded expensive gifts, never tried to force events. It was as if she gave him the opportunity to determine the pace of their relationship. Their first intimacy happened spontaneously, after a concert at Symphony Hall. The rain caught them halfway to their car, and they ran into the entryway of an old house. She stood very close, a wet strand of hair stuck to her cheek. The kiss came so naturally, as if they had kissed 1,000 times before. That night in his penthouse, Randall felt truly alive for the first time in a long time. Delilah had proven to be as passionate about love as she was about everything else. "You know," she said, lying beside him toward morning, "I never thought I'd meet a man like you. So real." A month later, he introduced her to his inner circle at a small dinner at his home. Delilah charmed everyone, joking with the company's general counsel, discussing modern art with his wife, taking an interest in the CFO's children. Only Marilyn Caldwell, his loyal assistant, seemed to maintain a cold wariness. After dinner, she lingered on the pretense of discussing business matters. "Is something wrong, Marilyn?" Randall asked, noticing her nervousness. "Sir, Mr. Thornton, I don't mean to be intrusive, but are you sure you know Miss Priestley well enough?" "What do you mean?" "Just be careful, sir. Sometimes people aren't what they seem." He waved that warning away. Delilah seemed such a breath of fresh air in his life that any doubt seemed blasphemous. She showed up at the office more and more often, either with a home-cooked lunch or just to chat during a break. The staff got used to her presence, greeted her, smiled. She knew how to make people feel at ease. "I like the atmosphere at your company," she would say. "There's a sense of family, a real family." And only Marilyn seemed to grow more anxious by the day. One day Randall overheard her on the phone saying, "I need everything you can find on Delilah Priestley. Yes, I realize it may take a while." At the time, he wrote it off as his assistant's overprotectiveness. Who knew her intuition would prove so accurate? Randall began to notice the first warning bells about 6 months into their relationship. It started with little things that seemed insignificant individually, but gradually added up to a disturbing picture. One evening, returning home earlier than usual, he found Delilah in his home office. She was standing by her desk, hurriedly going through some papers. "What are you doing here?" he asked, trying to keep his voice sounding casual. "Oh, honey." She flinched and pressed her hand to her chest. "You scared me. I was just looking for that article on modern art, remember? You said it was around here somewhere." The explanation sounded plausible, but something in her eyes, a fleeting shadow of worry, made him wary, especially since he hadn't shown her any article. A week later, he awoke in the middle of the night to the sound of her voice. Delilah was on the phone in the kitchen, clearly trying to speak softly. "No, it's not working out yet. Yes, I realize time is running out. Look, I can't talk right now. Yes, I'll get them, I promise." Noticing his silhouette in the doorway, she quickly ended the conversation. "Just a friend from Europe," she explained with a smile. "Forgot about the time difference." But suspicion was already beginning to gnaw at him from the inside. He became more attentive to details, and the details were disappointing. First, A copy of the merger agreement with Western Construction Corporation, an important document stored in the home safe, disappeared. Then the drafts of the new harbor reconstruction project disappeared. Maybe you put them in the office, Delilah innocently suggested when he mentioned the disappearance. Suspicious people began to appear outside the company building. Security reported a man who regularly took pictures of employees coming in and out. When they tried to approach him, he quickly fled in a black sedan with no license plates. Mr. Thornton, Baxter Higgins, an old friend of his father's and a lawyer for the company, asked for a meeting without witnesses. "I have something important to tell you." They were sitting in Baxter's favorite bar, an old-fashioned establishment with wood paneling and leather chairs. "Your friend," Baxter was clearly choosing his words, she started making inquiries about the structure of the company. Through her people, quite insistent about the financial flows and the decision-making system. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. What's more," he paused, "one of my colleagues recognized her, under a different name, of course. The story is rather unpleasant, involving the bankruptcy of a major construction firm in Chicago." That same evening, Randall instructed security to set up a covert surveillance on Delilah. Cameras, phone taps, movement tracking. He wanted to know everything. Marilyn worked overtime, gathering information bit by bit. One morning she placed a thin folder on his desk. "I think you should see this, sir." Inside were pictures of Delilah with various men, all successful businessmen, all not young, all rich, and all of them had lost their companies under mysterious circumstances. "Her real name is Patricia Donovan," Marilyn said quietly. 3 years ago she was involved in an industrial espionage scandal, but the case was hushed up. The first serious altercation came when Delilah talked about money. She casually mentioned that she wanted to open her own contemporary art gallery. "It's only like $2 million, honey. That's chump change to you." "I thought you loved art for art's sake," he remarked coldly. "What do you mean by that?" Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Nothing. Just surprised at the sudden business acumen." "You don't trust me?" She instantly switched to a resentful tone. "After everything that's happened between us, I thought we were family." "Family?" He grinned. "Like those families you made in Chicago and Miami?" She turned pale, but quickly pulled herself together. "I don't know what you mean, and it pains me that you believe some gossip more than you believe me." Her eyes filled with tears. "I love you, Randall. I really do. Don't you feel that?" He almost believed it. Almost. If it hadn't been for the security report in his desk drawer. Last night, Delilah had met with a known corporate raider at a private club on the outskirts of town. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was wrong." She threw herself around his neck, but he noticed how quickly her tears dried, and how cold was the calculating look she cast over his shoulder at the safe in the corner of the office. The game had begun. Patricia Donovan was born in a trailer park on the outskirts of Detroit. Her mother worked as a waitress at a roadside diner. Her father disappeared for months at a time, and when he showed up, it was only to pick up the last of his booze money. There was nothing beautiful in their lives, just rusty cars in the yards, the smell of rancid oil from the diner, and the eternal fear of another power outage for non-payment. "You think you're special?" yelled her mother when 12-year-old Patricia tried to read books instead of helping at the diner. "You think you're better than us? Remember, people like us never get out of here." But Patricia knew she would get out. She spent hours in the public library, avidly reading glossy magazines about the beautiful life. She studied how rich people talked, how they dressed, how they behaved. Every day before she went to bed, she imagined herself in a luxurious mansion, in a designer dress with impeccable hair. Her first experience with cheating happened in high school. She forged documents to get a scholarship, and she succeeded. In college, she perfected the art: fake references, fake recommendations, loan scams. She was smart enough to never get caught. These people deserve to be scammed, she told herself. They got everything simply because they were born into the right families. After college, her real transformation began. Plastic surgery reshaped her nose and chin, flawless teeth, etiquette lessons, studying art and literature. She was recreating herself like a sculptor working with clay. The first was an aging banker from Philadelphia. She met him at a charity event. Even then she realized that such events are ideal for finding victims. The marriage lasted 8 months. The divorce brought her her first million. You have to be flawless, she told her reflection every morning. So flawless that no one will suspect. The banker was followed by a Chicago industrialist, then a Miami hotel chain owner. Each time, the script was perfectly thought out. Chance meeting, charm, romance, marriage, divorce. She was never in a hurry, letting the victim bite the hook. Connections to the underworld came later. She needed specialists, crackers, hackers, corporate espionage experts. She chose her partners carefully, never fully trusting them. The story with banker James Henderson was to be her triumph. She almost gained control of his bank, but something went wrong. Henderson killed himself. An investigation began. She had to disappear in a hurry, leaving the loot behind. Randall Thornton seemed like the perfect target. Rich, lonely, with a reputation for not being good at personal relationships. 2 failed marriages in his past made him especially vulnerable. He'll look for the exact opposite of his exes in you, she reasoned as she prepared for their first chance meeting. Keep it simple. Be sincere. No ostentatious luxury. Her accomplices had been chosen carefully. Victor Crane, a specialist in corporate takeovers, Michael Porter, an extra-class hacker, the Donnelly brothers with their connections in the criminal world. Each knew only their part of the plan. Thornton Construction was going to be her big prize, a company built over several generations, vast assets, an impeccable reputation. It could all belong to her. But something went wrong. Perhaps she underestimated Marilyn Caldwell's intuition, or overestimated her ability to control the situation. Or maybe, for the first time in her life, she was actually starting to feel something for her victim. "Don't you dare!" she screamed at her reflection in the hotel room mirror. "Don't you dare get attached. He's just like the rest of them, an arrogant snob who thinks the whole world belongs to people like him." But sometimes, late at night, looking at Randall sleeping, she caught herself in a strange feeling, as if the little girl from the trailer park still lived somewhere deep inside her, dreaming not of money and revenge, but of simple, human warmth. "It's too late," she whispered to herself. "Too late for doubt." The plan had already been set in motion. Documents copied, people hired, all the details worked out. The last step remained, the very charity dinner where she was to play the center stage in this play. What she didn't know was that Randall had long ago figured out her game, and that her own trap was about to slam, catching the huntress herself in its grip. Baxter Higgins always came to important meetings with an unchanged leather briefcase that he remembered, it seemed, from the days of Howard Thornton. That evening, the briefcase was especially heavy with collected documents. "Look at this, Randall." Baxter spread the papers out on the desk in the home office. "Delilah, or whatever her name really is, has left an impressive trail behind her. 3 companies driven into bankruptcy, 2 divorces with large payoffs, 1 suicide. I want her to answer for everything." Randall stood at the window, looking out over Boston at night. "Not just disappeared with the money as usual, but real punishment. That requires hard evidence, and she must have done something illegal." The plan wasn't born immediately. They discussed the details until well into the night. Baxter made notes in his small handwriting, shaking his head occasionally. Risky, but it could work. The next 2 weeks passed in feverish preparation. A printing shop owned by an old family friend made perfect copies of the company's articles of incorporation, so perfect, in fact, that only an expert who knew certain marks could distinguish them from the originals. The installation of the cameras should be done as discreetly as possible, Randall instructed the security experts. She shouldn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Tiny lenses appeared in the most unexpected places, in fire sensors, in decor elements, even in floral arrangements. Every corner of the banquet hall had to be viewed from several angles. Marilyn worked almost around the clock, gathering information on Delilah. Gradually, a complete picture was emerging. Contacts, bank accounts, meeting places with accomplices. She meets them at the Blue Oyster, a bar on the edge of town, Marilyn reported. Always on Tuesdays, always at 9 o'clock at night. James Brown, the head of security, personally instructed each guard. When an incident starts, no amateurishness. Act strictly according to plan. Randall deliberately left the folder with the documents in conspicuous places, either in the office or in the living room. Delilah pretended not to notice them, but he could see her eyes light up. "Honey, you're getting absent-minded," she said with feigned concern. "Important papers like that need to be kept in a safe." A week before the scheduled date, Randall gathered his closest aides. "What's going to happen at the anniversary dinner may seem shocking, but I ask you to trust me and proceed as instructed." The organization of the event itself required special care. Every detail mattered. The arrangement of the tables, the lighting, even the music was chosen to create the right atmosphere. "Her table should be here," Randall noted the point on the floor plan. "In direct line of sight of the cameras, but far enough away from the exit." The night before, he sat in the empty banquet hall, mentally going over all the details of the upcoming performance. Somewhere in the city, Delilah was probably preparing for her performance as well, unaware that she was playing from someone else's script. "You're no better than her yourself," the inner voice whispered, "manipulating, setting traps." "No," he contradicted himself, "I'm just restoring justice." On the day of the event, he woke up early. Delilah was still asleep, and he stared at her serene face for several minutes. How skillfully she had learned to wear her masks. Even in her sleep, she looked the epitome of innocence. "Today is your last performance," he thought, rising silently from the bed. He checked the original documents one more time before tucking them into the inside pocket of his jacket. He left the copies in his office, in the most prominent place, as if accidentally forgotten in a hurry. The trap was ready. All that remained was to wait for the victim to make the final move. The morning after the scandal was unusually cold for early fall. Randall stood at the panoramic window of his office on the top floor, watching the first rays of sunlight color Boston skyscrapers pink. The untouched coffee Marilyn had brought in an hour ago smoked on the desk. The phone had been ringing off the hook since dawn. Journalists, partners, acquaintances, all were eager for details of yesterday's incident. The Boston Globe had already run a front-page story. Thornton construction scandal, raid attempt, or personal drama. "Sir," Marilyn appeared noiselessly in the doorway, "the police are asking you to come in to give a formal statement, and Miss Priestley's attorney, Miss Donovan, is trying to arrange a meeting." "Who did she hire?" "Martin Schwartz." Randall grinned unhappily. Schwartz was renowned for his ability to solve the delicate problems of wealthy clients. Not a cheap lawyer. Apparently Delilah had some serious money stashed away. The atmosphere in the office was tense. Employees were whispering in corners, silent when their superiors appeared. Some openly resented the fact that the company was embroiled in a scandal, while others defended the boss, claiming that he himself had been victimized by the fraudster. "Mr. Thornton," the young secretary nervously rubbed the edge of her blouse. "There are reporters down there. There are reporters down there. Lots of journalists." He glimpsed out the window. There were indeed members of the press with cameras and microphones crowded at the entrance to the building. Baxter showed up close to noon, laden with folders of documents. "I've prepared a statement to the prosecutor's office," he announced, spreading the papers out on the table. "Fraud, attempted theft of documents, willful damage to property. Given her previous exploits, she's looking at some serious time." A phone call interrupted their conversation. The name Frank Morton, owner of a large real estate development company, popped up on the screen. "Randall, buddy." Morton's voice oozed fake sympathy. "What a nasty story. You know, in light of recent events, it might be worth renegotiating the terms of our contract to develop the southern neighborhood." The competitors, sensing weakness, began to press. They circled the company like vultures, hoping to get a piece of the action. By late afternoon, Delilah's other victims began to appear. The first to call was James Henderson, the same banker she'd driven to attempt suicide. "I'm ready to testify." His voice sounded muffled. "It's time to put an end to this." Randall felt devastated. Even though everything had gone according to plan, there was a sort of dull ache inside. He caught himself twirling the pearl earrings in his hands, a gift from his grandmother that Delilah had somehow forgotten from him. He knew now that they had been stolen from the wife of a Chicago industrialist. "Mr. Thornton," Marilyn peered into the office. "You have a visitor, Mrs. Evelyn Grant." He didn't immediately recognize his first wife. She'd changed over the years, more reserved, more elegant. The only thing that remained of the flighty red-headed girl he'd met in college was the peculiar way she tilted her head slightly when speaking. "Hey, Rand." She took a seat in the chair, giving him an attentive look. "You look lousy." "Thanks for your concern," he smiled involuntarily. "Why are you here? You know, after our divorce, I often thought you deserved all of it. The cheating, the scandal, the trial. I wanted you to suffer." She was quiet. "But now, reading about this woman, no one deserves that." "Did you come to gloat?" "No," she shook her head. "I came to help. I have my own contemporary art gallery, remember? And I found something about your friend's charity work in the art world. I think the prosecutor's office will be interested." They talked until late in the afternoon. Evelyn was an attentive listener. She didn't judge or give unsolicited advice. She was simply there for them, as she had been once upon a time when they were young and truly close. "You know," she said as she walked away, "maybe sometimes we are sent trials not to break us, but to finally learn something important. And what do I have to learn? Maybe that not everyone betrays," she smiled softly. "Some come back to be supportive, even if you don't expect it." That night, Randall slept peacefully for the first time in a long time. There were more battles ahead, but he no longer felt alone in this war. The police station greeted them with a humming hallway and the smell of coffee. Randall walked across the gray linoleum, feeling the tension building inside. He'd almost convinced himself over the past few days that he was in complete control of his emotions, but now, knowing he'd see her again in a few minutes, he felt his fingers twitch. Delilah was already waiting in the interrogation room. She sat with her back straightened, wearing a strict dark blue suit. No makeup, her hair in a simple bundle. The image of a businesswoman victimized by circumstance. Only her eyes betrayed her true state of mind, a cold fury in them. "Mr. Thornton," Detective Morrison nodded to a chair. "Have a seat." "Hello, lover." Delilah smiled the same smile that had once taken his breath away. "Or should I call you Mr. Thornton now?" "Let's cut to the chase," Baxter interjected, spreading out some papers on the table. "Oh yes, of course." She leaned back in her chair. "Just first, why don't we tell the detective about those cute little notes you used to leave me in the mornings, or about what you called me in bed?" "Miss Donovan," Morrison tapped his pencil on the desk. "Let's stay within the scope of the investigation." But this is an investigation, isn't it? Her voice turned honeyed. The story of how a powerful businessman used a naive woman and then decided to get rid of her. Naive? Randall finally spoke up. Like James Henderson or Robert Myers. How many naive women have you left destitute by ruining their husbands? The next morning, a strange package arrived at the company's office. Inside were photos and documents compromising several board members. Bad deals, tax fraud, personal scandals. Someone had done some serious work. She prepared thoroughly, Baxter remarked as he looked through the materials, gathered information on all the key figures. An hour later, the chaos began. The company's stock plummeted in value, and anonymous allegations of financial irregularities surfaced. The threat of a hostile takeover loomed on the horizon. Victor Crane, Marilyn placed a file on the desk. Known corporate takeover specialist, worked with Delilah before. There was a scuffle in the lobby of the business center. Men in black tried to break into the company's offices, and a fight broke out with security guards. 2 security officers ended up in the hospital. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Agent Diana Ross showed her ID. We've been following Miss Donovan's activities for a long time. This is no longer just fraud. There are signs of organized criminal activity here. It seemed the situation was beginning to clear up. But suddenly, Michael Porter, a key witness ready to testify about the hacking attacks on the company, disappeared. His car was found abandoned in a parking lot near the airport. She's eliminating witnesses, Randall paced the office. We need to move faster. Mr. Thornton, a pale secretary, peered into the office. There's a call for you. It's her. He picked up the phone, putting it on speakerphone. Silence hung in the room. You know, Randall, Delilah's voice sounded almost tender. I've really started to fall in love with you. It's funny, isn't it? So many years of perfect work and suddenly such weakness. What do you want? Just to talk, to reminisce about old times, like the night you told me about your childhood, about how your father never understood you, how you dreamed of a different life. What's the point of this conversation? To the fact that you and I are more alike than you realize. Both of us spending our whole lives trying to prove something to the ghosts of the past. The only difference is the methods. A steely note appeared in her voice. I have something interesting about your precious father. You want to know what kind of deals he was running in the 80s. Your partners will be thrilled. Don't touch my father's memory. His voice became quiet and dangerous. Or else what? She laughed. Will you put me away? But then I'll take everyone with me. Your reputation, your company, your precious legacy. The connection broke. A heavy silence hung in the office. She's bluffing, Baxter said uncertainly. No, Randall shook his head. She never bluffs. Then the game is being taken to a new level. Outside the window, dusk was thickening. Somewhere in the city, Delilah was preparing her next move, and he had to be ready for it. Marcus Shefford didn't like airplanes. 20 years as a private investigator had taught him that you always find the most important details on the road, in roadside diners, in conversations with locals, in dusty small-town archives. So to Detroit he drove his tattered Ford. Quiet Harbor Trailer Park, he muttered, checking the records. Nothing quiet, just a harbor. The place looked exactly as he'd expected. Rusted car hulks, shabby trailers, laundry on ropes between stunted trees. The air was saturated with the smell of fried butter from Joe's diner next door. Patricia Donovan? An elderly waitress in a greasy apron chewed her lips. Oh, you mean Patty. Maggie's daughter, is it? Haven't seen her in a while. They say she went to college, made it in the world. The local high school still had the old journals. Patricia was an honors student, drama club member, won prizes in the Olympics, and constantly forged her mother's signatures in her diary. Smart girl was, recalled the school librarian. Only angry somehow, all the time dreaming of a rich life, reading fashion magazines. And once organized a harassment of the principal's daughter, she came to the prom in a designer dress. Next stop was Philadelphia. Delilah's first husband, Howard Priestley, now lived in a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. I didn't immediately realize what was going on. He twirled the whiskey glass nervously in his hands. She was so caring, always knew what to say, how to comfort. And then the strange transactions with the bank's stock started. By the time I came to my senses, it was too late. In Chicago, Shefford met with a private investigator who was working an industrial espionage case. Look, the man spread photographs on the table. Here she is at a fundraiser with Michael Porter, the famous hacker, and here's a meeting with the Donnelly brothers. These guys don't do charity work, believe me. In Miami, the trail led to a luxury mansion. Former hotel chain owner Richard Sterling met the detective in a wheelchair. Heart attack, he explained, after finding out that all the paperwork was forged and the accounts were empty. You know what the worst part is? I still miss her sometimes. Delilah's real identity began to emerge like a photograph in a developer. Patricia Donovan disappeared after college. Then came Elizabeth Gray, then Sylvia Page, then Delilah Priestley. Each time, a new look, a new legend, new ID. Her first major crime was in college. Forged grant documents, blackmailed a professor who discovered it. The case was hushed up, but the trail remains. She always worked with professionals, recounted a former accomplice serving time in federal prison. No amateurs. Calculated everything down to the last detail, and never left any witnesses. The breakthrough happened in Seattle. An anonymous tipster led Shefford to an abandoned warehouse. A hiding place under the floorboards revealed documents, photos, recordings of conversations, an entire archive of criminal activity. This isn't just fraud, Shefford reported to Randall. We're dealing with an entire organization. Delilah is just the tip of the iceberg. There are serious people behind it who specialize in raiding and corporate espionage. The scale of the operations was staggering. Dozens of companies across the country, millions of dollars funneled through offshore, bribed officials, intimidated witnesses. But she made a mistake. Shefford placed the last folder on the table. For the first time ever, she started acting emotional. You seem to have touched a nerve with her, Mr. Thornton. Randall stared silently at the photographs spread out on the table. Each picture was another mask, another role. But in the last pictures, taken surreptitiously during their meetings, there was something new in her gaze, something real. This will ruin her, the detective concluded. For the first time, she's allowed herself to become attached to a victim. And now we know her weak spot. It was beginning to rain outside the window. Randall thought about the fact that somewhere out there, in this huge city, there was a little girl hiding in a trailer park who just wanted a different life, and that sometimes revenge could be scarier than any punishment. Get the paperwork ready for the DA's office, he said finally. It's time to wrap up this story. Catherine Thornton Hayes always appeared unexpectedly. She entered Randall's office without knocking, still as impeccable as ever, in a Chanel suit and a string of pearls around her neck. You look terrible, she announced in lieu of a greeting, and disgusting coffee, as always. Randall smiled involuntarily. During their marriage, they'd argued about coffee constantly. She only recognized a certain variety from some microscopic plantation in Colombia. To what do I owe the honor? Oh, come on, she sank gracefully into a chair. I've seen the news, and I know something interesting about your girlfriend, more specifically, about her connections in the world of antiques. As it turned out, Catherine, being a well-known art dealer, accidentally crossed paths with Delilah 2 years ago at an auction in Europe. Only then the one introduced herself under a different name and tried to pull a scam with fake paintings. "Marilyn," Randall called out over the intercom. "Come in, please." His assistant brought a thick folder with notes on Delilah's suspicious behavior, strange calls, unexplained meetings, missing documents. She'd kept notes from the beginning, trusting her intuition. "I tried to give you a hint, sir," she said quietly, "but she was so convincing." By late afternoon, a veritable war council had gathered in the office. Baxter had activated Howard Thornton's old connections in political circles. Senator James Russell, an old friend of his father's, promised support at the federal level. "Your father helped me when no one else believed in my project," the senator said by phone. "It's time to pay back the debts." Big business partners have begun to pull up too. Robert Chang, owner of a construction concern, offered to join forces. "If we don't stop it now, tomorrow it will come for all of us." Gradually, a countermeasures group was formed. Lawyers, financiers, security specialists. Each was responsible for a different area of work. At night, Randall sat in his office for hours, staring at pictures of Delilah. Revenge or justice? Where was the line between restoring order and wanting to hurt? He couldn't find an answer. Daniel Frost, a well-known journalist, had launched his own investigation. His articles brought the case to the public's attention. "This is not just a story about fraud," he said. "This is a story about how ambition and a thirst for revenge can warp the human soul." An anonymous informant, someone among Delilah's former associates, provided unexpected help. He passed a thumb drive with recordings of her conversations with criminal bosses through her lawyer. "She betrayed a lot of people," the lawyer explained. "Now they want to get even." The evidence piled up. Bank statements, witness statements, photographs, tapes of conversations, all were adding up to an irrefutable picture of years of criminal activity. "We're almost ready," Baxter reported. "There's just a few formalities to settle with the prosecutor's office." On the last night before the court filing, Randall stayed late in the office. Catherine brought him a cup of the very same Colombian coffee. "You know," she said, looking out at the nighttime city, "when we got divorced, I thought you were too cold, too calculating. And you just never met a man worth losing your head for. And what good is that? That now you know both sides of the coin, both love and betrayal. It makes you stronger." She walked away, leaving behind a light scent of perfume and some strange sense of peace. The decisive day was ahead, and Randall knew he was not alone in this battle now. Somewhere in the city, a clock struck. It was time to put an end to this story. The morning began with an anonymous letter to the editor of the Boston Globe. Some concerned staffer was telling a heartbreaking story about Randall Thornton driving a young female intern to suicide 10 years ago. The story was completely made up, but written so convincingly that the newspaper launched its own investigation. "This is just the beginning," Baxter said, looking at the morning news. "It hits the most hurtful thing: reputation." The next blow was to the witnesses. James Henderson was offered $5 million to change his testimony. When he refused, his daughter was nearly struck by a car outside the school. The driver was never found. Randall received an envelope with photos of his nephews, the children of a sister who lives in Seattle. The pictures were taken in their schoolyard. The note read, "The kids are so fragile. Take care of them." "She plays dirty," Marilyn put another security brief on the table, "and she has resources." The most unpleasant surprise was a chance encounter at a restaurant. A young woman who looked just like the non-existent intern had thrown a tantrum, accusing Randall of all the deadly sins. Of course, someone accidentally videotaped the whole thing, and the footage instantly went viral on social media. "Sir," the head of IT flew into the office, "we've had the servers hacked. Someone has accessed internal documentation." Within an hour, emails started arriving to board members. Old sins, carefully hidden secrets, compromising photos. Delilah had prepared thoroughly. Mr. Preston is threatening to resign from the board, Marilyn reported, says he can't risk his reputation. Fake financial reports appeared online, showing serious irregularities in the company's operations. The stock plummeted 30% in one day. A crowd of outraged citizens gathered outside the office building with placards accusing the company of every deadly sin from pollution to worker exploitation. It later emerged that they had all been paid $200 each to participate in the rally. "She wants to provoke us into making a mistake," Baxter observed, "to make us act emotionally." But the worst blow came in the evening. Marilyn was late at the office, sorting out paperwork for the prosecutor's office. An unknown masked man attacked her in an underground parking garage. A blow to the head, an attempt to stage a robbery. "I had time to press the panic button," she later recounted from her hospital room. Security showed up just in time. Randall sat beside her bed, feeling the cold rage boiling up inside. It was one thing to lash out at him, and quite another to lash out at innocent people. "You know," Marilyn smiled weakly, she miscalculated. "Thought she was going to scare us, but she just made us stronger." The phone rang in the hospital hallway. It was an unfamiliar number. "How do you like my presents?" Delilah's voice sounded almost cheerful. "They're just flowers. You haven't seen the real war yet." "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why involve innocent people?" "Innocent people," she laughed. "There are no innocents in our world, sweetheart. There are only winners and losers. And I'm not going to be among the losers." "You've already lost," he said, "the moment you crossed the line." He disconnected the phone and turned to Baxter. "Send the paperwork to the DA's office. Immediately. It's time to end this circus." Outside the hospital window, dawn was breaking. The new day promised new battles, but now Randall knew for sure there would be no mercy. She'd chosen this path. The conference room of the Four Seasons Hotel was packed. Journalists, photographers, television crews. It seemed as if every major media outlet on the East Coast had gathered here. Randall stood backstage, listening to the growing buzz of voices. "Are you ready?" Baxter adjusted his tie. "Remember, no emotion, just the facts." The press conference began at 10 a.m. sharp. Photos, documents, financial flowcharts appeared on huge screens. The story of Delilah Priestley, a.k.a. Patricia Donovan, unfolded before the audience like a detective novel. "You have before you the results of a 3-month investigation." Randall's voice sounded calm and confident. "We are dealing with an unprecedented case of organized fraud." James Henderson was the first to speak. His story of how he lost everything, his bank, his reputation, his family, made the hall go quiet. "I thought I'd found the love of my life," his voice shook. "And what I found was a professional con artist." Other victims followed. Each story was unique, but the pattern remained the same: fascination, trust, betrayal, ruin. "We uncovered a network of offshore accounts." Baxter showed complex financial schemes on the screen. "Over $100 million has been withdrawn through shell companies." In the middle of the press conference, the unexpected happened. Victor Crane, Delilah's right-hand man in most of her operations, entered the room. "I'm ready to testify," he announced. "About everything. About methods of operation, about ties to crime, about plans to take over Thornton's company." It was a betrayal Delilah certainly hadn't expected. Crane knew too much. "She was planning to get rid of me," he explained later. "I just got ahead of her." At 3 o'clock in the afternoon came a message from airport security. Delilah was trying to fly on a private jet to Dubai. She was detained right at the gangway. "All accounts have been blocked," the CFO reported. "Assets have been frozen. She won't be able to use that money anymore." News of Michael Porter's suicide came in the evening. He was found in an expensive hotel room with his veins slit. Next to him was a note. She will never forgive the betrayal. A chain reaction has begun, Baxter observed. The rats are fleeing the ship. By nightfall, the main players in the scheme had been arrested. The Donnelly brothers, several corrupt officials, 2 bankers who helped launder the money. Delilah's empire was crumbling like a house of cards. Randall watched from his office. On the desk was Delilah's last photograph, the one taken at the time of her arrest. It was the first time he'd seen real emotion on her face: fear, rage, despair. "Mr. Thornton," Marilyn peered into the office, still pale from the attack but already back to work. "The prosecutor wants to talk to you." "Well," he rose, "time to wrap this story up." Outside the window, the sunset was burning down, painting the skyscrapers of Boston blood red. Somewhere in the police station, Delilah was probably already planning her next move. But this time, she had no chance of getting away with it. The game was over. Boston's federal courthouse was surrounded by reporters that day. Delilah Priestley's trial had gotten national attention. The case was too high profile, the victims too famous. Delilah looked impeccable in the courtroom, a strict business suit, a minimum of makeup, her hair gathered in a neat bundle. She held herself with dignity, as if it were a business meeting, not a trial. "Case number 824, the clerk announced. United States v. Patricia Donovan, also known as Delilah Priestley." A string of witnesses passed in front of the court. Victor Crane detailed the mechanism of the raids. James Henderson recounted the loss of the bank. Marilyn testified about the defendant's suspicious behavior in the company. On the 3rd day of the trial, the unexpected happened. A young woman asked to speak. It turned out to be Michael Porter's sister. "My brother did not commit suicide," her voice trembled. "The day before he died, he called me, said he was afraid for his life, that she threatened to kill me and my children if he talked." A murmur went up in the hall. Delilah didn't even blink, but her fingers clutching the desk handle turned white with tension. Her lawyers had tried to cut a deal with the investigation, offered a full guilty plea in exchange for a minimum sentence. The prosecutor refused. The charges were too serious. Randall's testimony took all day. He methodically, hour by hour, described how events unfolded, how the first suspicions were aroused, how evidence was gathered, how the trap was prepared. "Look at this woman," he said, looking directly at Delilah. "She's a talented actress. Every word, every gesture is part of an elaborate role. But behind the mask is a predator who will stop at nothing." New evidence appeared on the prosecutor's desk. Recordings of phone conversations with the customers of Porter's murder, documents about money transfers to killers, evidence of threats to other witnesses. The defense attorney built his speech on psychological trauma, a difficult childhood, an abusive father, poverty. He painted an image of a woman who was just trying to break out of a vicious cycle. "Look at her," he called out to the jury. "Does this woman look like a hardened criminal? She's a victim of circumstance, a victim of a society that has turned its back on her." Delilah's last word was a masterpiece of manipulation. She spoke softly with a slight tremor in her voice. "I admit my mistakes. Yes, I hurt a lot of people, but I have also loved. For the first time in my life, I truly loved, and it became my curse. Randall Thornton broke my heart and I lost control." She looked at Randall, the same look that had once taken his breath away. But now he saw only the emptiness behind that mask. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned to the room, the foreman held up the verdict sheet. On all counts of the indictment, guilty. The judge announced the sentence: 25 years in federal prison without parole for the first 15 years. Delilah listened to the sentence without flinching. Only as she was being led out of the room did she turn and look at Randall. There was everything in that look: hatred, pain, undercurrent of emotion, and something else he couldn't find a name for. "It's over," Baxter said as they walked out of the courthouse. No, Randall shook his head. This is just the beginning for her. She's not the type to give up. The evening sky over Boston was surprisingly clear. Somewhere in a federal prison, Delilah was probably already plotting her next move, and he just wanted to get back to normal, if that was still possible. The federal women's prison in Danbury, Connecticut, welcomed its newest inmate on a chilly December morning. Delilah Priestley, now officially Patricia Donovan, entered the prison gates with her head held high. That same day, federal marshals began seizing her assets: mansions in 3 states, a collection of antiques, Swiss bank accounts, a yacht off the coast of Florida. An empire built on lies and manipulation crumbled like a house of cards. Boston's business community was buzzing. Thornton Construction's stock was slowly but surely creeping upward. You know, Robert Chang said at a business dinner, you came out of that story a winner. Not everyone could have handled a blow like that. Randall worked almost around the clock rebuilding the company's reputation. New contracts, charity projects, social responsibility programs. It was as if he was trying to prove to the world and to himself that the Thornton Empire was stronger than any upheaval. In the evenings, he often sat in his father's office, which he kept in pristine condition. The antique clock on the wall still counted down the time, and the photographs on the walls kept the memory of the past. "You were right, Father," he said, looking at the portrait of Howard Thornton. "You can't believe pretty words, but you didn't say it would hurt this much." The letter from Delilah came 3 months after her imprisonment began. The handwriting was still as graceful, as if she were writing not on prison paper, but on expensive vellum. "Dear Randall, you must be surprised to receive this letter. Or were you expecting it? You know, prison gives you a lot to think about. I think about us, about what might have been if things had gone differently. Sometimes I think those moments with you were the only real moments of my life. It's funny, isn't it? A professional liar finally telling the truth. I'm not apologizing. We both know that some things can't be forgiven. But I want you to know that you were special. The only one who saw me as more than just a mask. Take care of yourself. And don't let this story make your heart as cold as mine. Delilah, or however you prefer Patricia." He sat over that letter for a long time, trying to figure out if it was another manipulation or a rare moment of sincerity. Finally, he crumpled the sheet and tossed it in the basket. One spring day, he drove to the cemetery. His father's grave was drowning in the first spring flowers. Marilyn always kept an eye out for it. "I realized something important," he said, sinking down on the bench next to the headstone. "You taught me to be strong, taught me not to trust people, but you forgot to teach me to forgive not others, myself." In the evening, Catherine appeared in his office. She brought 2 cups of the very same Colombian coffee and settled into a chair. "You look better," she remarked. "More alive." "I've made a decision." He looked out the window where the first stars were lighting up. "I'm stepping down as CEO." "What?" She nearly spilled her coffee. "But why?" "The company needs fresh blood, and I want to do what I've always wanted to do. I'm going to open a contemporary art gallery." "Your father would roll over in his grave," Catherine grinned. "Maybe," he smiled. "But for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing the right thing." Outside the window, evening Boston was buzzing. Somewhere in Danbury prison, Delilah might be looking up at the same stars. But that didn't matter anymore. It was time to start a new chapter. 3 years could change a lot of things. Randall stood at the window of his contemporary art gallery in downtown Boston, watching the pre-sunset bustle. His hair had touched its first gray, but there was a calmness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The company was thriving under the leadership of young CEO Michael Thornton, his nephew, his sister's son. The kid inherited his uncle's business acumen and added to it a modern approach to business. "You didn't regret your decision?" Marilyn asked, stopping by to see him on the eve of her wedding. She was going to marry the very detective, Marcus Shefford, who had investigated Delilah. "Not for a second," he smiled. "You know, sometimes you have to lose something important to find your real self." His gallery became one of Boston's most successful art projects. He was finally doing what he dreamed of doing in his youth. And in the evenings, he often spent time with Anna Lawrence, an art historian from Chicago whom he met at a contemporary sculpture show. "There's a certain depth," she once said. "It's as if you've been through something serious and become wiser." He hadn't told her about Delilah. Hadn't told her yet. Some wounds take time to heal completely. The charitable foundation for victims of financial fraud, set up with money from Delilah's confiscated assets, had already helped hundreds of people. Randall personally oversaw each complex case. News about Delilah was rare. She was a model prisoner, teaching economics to other inmates, writing a book, which, however, was not allowed to be published. She was said to have changed a great deal in appearance, but her mind remained as sharp as ever. Surprisingly, it was this story that helped him come to terms with the past. With Evelyn, they became good friends. She often exhibited the work of her artists in his gallery. Catherine advised him on the art market, and their business relationship gradually developed into a warm friendship. "You know what the weirdest thing is?" he said to Baxter when he stopped by for a traditional evening whiskey. "I'm not mad at her anymore. At Delilah. She taught me the most important lesson of my life." "What's that?" "That you can't build happiness on a lie. Even if the lies are beautiful and convincing, sooner or later the truth will still come out." In his office, his father's portrait still hung. But now, there were other pictures nearby. His sister with her children, Marilyn in her wedding dress, a gallery opening, Anna among the exhibits of a new exhibition. Life goes on, he thought, looking at the sunset over Boston. And sometimes you have to go through the darkness to see the light. He pulled from his desk drawer the last letter from Delilah, which had arrived a week ago. She wrote that she was genuinely pleased with his progress in the art world. "Maybe in another life we could have opened a gallery together," she wrote. "But this life has taught me that some roads can't be traveled twice." Randall folded the letter and put it away with the others. He kept them all, not knowing why himself. Maybe as a reminder that even in the darkest story there could be a glimmer of humanity. The phone rang on the table. Anna was reminding him about the evening concert at Symphony Hall. It was time to go. The past remained in the past, but the future finally seemed bright.